day. What a great
Good,
day.
good to have you here.
Thank you.
Yeah, we're so excited to have you back. I think you did the conversation circle last time.
Mhm.
So yeah, I'm super glad you're able to do a full presentation.
Thanks, Darren.
Um,
Much appreciated. But what a wonderful conference. I've been fortunate to be able to have the time to sit on the bulk today, and the speakers have just been outstanding. I think hopefully I can stay up to par with what everyone has been able to provide today. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and try and share my screen, if that's okay.
yeah, I made you a co-host, so you should be able to.
Okay. Are you able to see it? Excellent. Thank you so much. All right, everyone. Thank you so much. It's been a long day, and hopefully I'm going to be able to provide some additional information here for conversations that we all either have had or in the middle of having or should eventually be prepared to have. We're going to talk about two difficult conversations today. The first one being the giving up driving, or I like to call it a retirement from driving. And the second one will be some of the discussions that we might need to have with either our parents or our significant others with regards to moving to senior livings. Some of the issues and the techniques that I talk about are going to be consistent through both conversations. But I'm really going to try and focus on some thoughts and ideas about how to first open up the conversation, some ideas about how to at least start the discussion, looking at the process, and maybe some ideas about things that we might not want to say during the conversation based on my experiences. First of all, my name is Jack Angel. I'm a certified senior advisor, certified dementia practitioner, and I work through the greater Houston area to provide families with help to find long-term living solutions. I do that at no charge. I also do elder care planning services. If someone's looking at VA assistance or Medicaid assistance, things of that nature, I can help guide through my network of professionals. And then, as Darren had alluded to, I do offer the nationally recognized Beyond Driving with Dignity senior driving self-assessment course, because no one wants to tell mom or dad they can't drive anymore. So with that, I'm going to start with the most difficult conversation first, and this might seem counterintuitive, but when I speak with medical professionals, the idea of having a conversation with some of their patients and their family members about giving up driving is one of their greatest concerns. It obviously is a very contentious discussion if not handled in the right way. And I like to look in the mirror when I'm talking about these types of conversations. How would I feel if someone was approaching me with regards to an issue like having to retire from driving? How would I take that? What are some of the concerns I would have personally about, my lifestyle and, my transportation needs, and how do I get around? Would I look at it enthusiastically and say, okay, that's great. I don't have to mess with traffic. I don't have to, worry about maintaining vehicles and things of that nature? Or would I feel at a complete loss, that I've lost my independence, that now all of a sudden I'm going to be relegated to relying on other people? And I think that's part of some of the discussions that we're going to have today. The reality is that for many of us, there will come a day, or there certainly may come a day, when we have to look at this for ourselves. And I think having that sensitivity when we're discussing it with our loved ones is at the forefront of the conversation, and certainly starting the conversation. It's a little busy out there. And for any of you who've seen my presentations before, I like to reference some of these illustrations, because they do reflect a lot about the type of driving that faces all of us on the roadways today. We have seen on some of the DOT signs out there silver alerts for someone who's got lost or not made it home yet, or things of that nature. And ultimately, for everyone here on the presentation today, my expectation is that you're trying to make sure that doesn't happen. And that's a big part of having these conversations. What I will state at this point is it's never, or in my experience, it's never been beneficial to wait. Once you identify, and we'll go through some of the leading indicators about having that conversation, it's never in the benefit of the family, the loved one themselves, to actually wait and delay the conversation, as difficult as they are. And I think part of the things that we're going to talk about here today can help provide some guidance on at least how to open up the dialogue. It's usually not done in just a single session. These are things that usually happen over time. And that time is going to really be dependent upon your loved one and how well they either embrace the thought of either curtailing or giving up their keys or resist it. And there are some different techniques that we can use to address the latter. First and foremost, we do need to be aware that this is real. The population is aging. And just due to the frail nature of our bodies as we do start to age, just the natural decline that we have altogether, the older driver is more likely to be either severely injured or unfortunately be killed on, in many cases, relatively minor accidents. 40% of the fatal collisions for people 70 and older occur at intersections. So anytime that a loved one is trying to traverse some of these intersections, especially left-hand turns, and that can be part of the discussion about planning routes to ensure that you minimize left-hand turns, that we're certainly more likely to be involved in something a little bit more serious. The knock-on effect to that, if they're not actually killed in the accident itself, then of course is that you've got a recovery period, and at that accelerated or the older age, sometimes those recovery periods can lead into other issues and possibly into some other long-term care needs. Drivers 85 and older are 9 times more likely to die in a crash than are people 25 to 69. Now, I state that, but really, a lot of our assessments really should be focused on the abilities and the cognitive capabilities and the physical capabilities of the individual. So their age by itself is not really an absolute predictor. You can't say by a certain age someone needs to hand in their keys, but its impact should certainly not be denied. And I think when we look at some of the takeaways here, if we're starting to see some of those issues or concerns that we have about a loved one and their ability to be able to stay on the road safely, which is what this is all about, then it's time to actually have that conversation. I just use this as another example here. This is where a family had agreed to put all of what they consider to be safety controls and measures in place, where the seniors would only drive at a certain time of day. They would only drive on a route that was familiar to them, things of this nature, stay off the freeway, and ultimately ended up taking a left turn instead of a right turn, ended up in the middle of a snowstorm and unfortunately lost their lives. I don't want to sensationalize this, but I think it does kind of reflect very closely to recognizing that if there are limits in the driver's abilities, then they need to be out in the open and discussed very openly, because as we've already seen from earlier presentations today, there are a wealth of resources out there specific to transportation. And there's no reason why giving up the keys or retiring from driving should mean a loss of independence. I'm adamant about this. I think it certainly is going to mean some level of inconvenience, and no denying that. But with the resources that we have within Houston and the greater Houston area, there's just a wealth of solutions for us out there to be able to support whatever driving that we need. Down to Walmart, going to church, back and forth to medical visits, seeing friends and family. There's just, I think, a tremendous number of resources out there. Some of what we discussed here earlier today. And then if anyone has any questions about a list, and I'm only too happy to provide them with a list of resources specific to their geographic location. So what are the signs? What are some of the things that we usually see that can raise the red flags? I will say that any one of these in and by themselves is probably not an indicator that, okay, that's it. You know, you left your indicator on, left your blinker on. Okay, that's it. You've got to hang up your keys. But I think it's more the repeated nature. Certainly by the time I get a call to come and do an assessment with a family, a senior or a loved one, something's happened. They've either gotten lost, they ran over the mailbox, something along those lines. But if you look at the signs that are listed here, the abrupt lane changes, the braking, acceleration, abrupt braking or abrupt acceleration, the more frequent close calls, sometimes the senior's ability to be able to judge oncoming traffic, especially in left-hand turns, have been seen at the root of a lot of the accidents themselves. I've had discussions with seniors who felt that they were actually in an extremely friendly neighborhood because no matter where they drove, people were honking and waving their hands at them, not really appreciating or realizing that they were driving half of the posted speed limit. And people weren't necessarily friendly to them, but they were actually reaching out to express some frustration. That conflict on the road, and we know certainly in our area, can lead into a whole other set of issues. Reluctance from friends or relatives to actually get in the car with them. And certainly when we're talking about grandchildren actually riding with our grandparents, the idea of getting lost or drifting in other lanes. I talked about the turn signal, but it's more if it's left on all the time or something frequently. So these are some of the signs that should raise the red flags for us, whereby we can actually say, okay, it's time for us to have that conversation with mom or dad or a spouse with regards to their driving. Looking in the mirror, as we talked about a little bit earlier, why would you want to give up their driving? You know, why would someone want to give up their driving? And certainly, it's not all just the loss of independence that we all tend to defer to, and not that it's not a huge issue, but there are certainly some self-conscious concerns that seniors have with regards to being a burden on someone else, actually having to, you know, the reluctance to rely on someone else or ask for that help. It's sometimes, you know, they're actually reluctant to be able to do that. It's another feeling of loss in that age or stage of life where we actually are having to deal with loss on a regular basis. I don't mean routine, but certainly it's another part of that process. The idea that you're not going to be able to get to church or see your friends, it's deferring or defaulting to the worst case scenario, not really appreciating all the other options that are out there for you. And then ultimately the pride and dignity that goes with that certain level of independence, that you have your own keys, that at any time, if you wanted to go out, whether or not you are driving, but you have that car available. It has been shown, and clinical studies will support it, that if not handled properly, just by forcing an older driver to give up the driving, it can trigger some depression and isolation, which in turn can eventually cause, you know, some physical health deterioration. So we do want to be sensitive to it, but I would say maybe not completely with the kid gloves. I think that there's some hard or tough love that goes with it, but still done with dignity, empathy, sensitivity. And I know that's almost sounds a little contradictory, but I think that there was certainly ways for us to be able to do it. For this gentleman here, this would be a tough conversation. And I can't even imagine beginning this with someone who maybe not, you know, be open to the idea of somebody else letting them know that they're not safe on the road. But unfortunately, I think the idea that avoidance can lead to even some more worse or more serious consequences. If we look at some of the issues we talk about, obviously our loved one and the concerns that we have if they get lost or if they have a little fender bender, that's fine. What we sometimes overlook is that if our loved one was involved in something a little bit more serious where they were at fault, they hit the gas instead of the brake, they ended up plowing through a sidewalk, heaven forbid that there were some pedestrians there, you know, ultimately they could be spending, looking at incarceration, if not criminal, certainly civil suits, spending the rest of their days, you know, having to deal with all of the resources that they have, paying lawyers in defense of some of this stuff as well. So there are certainly some very serious issues at stake here, not just the ones more closer to home when we talk about them as an individual and being in a small fender bender. I don't want to sound harsh on that, but that's the reality of the society that we live in. And shame on us if we don't recognize those red flags and then take some action, because ultimately that's what it's about. It's having the conversation, opening up the process. It may take a month, it may take 6 months, but at least opening up the dialogue and planting the seeds for us to be able to address the situation and then rectify it into a workable solution for everyone. You don't want to challenge the individual. You don't want to, I think, talk about, just some feelings. We want to talk about specifics, and I'll actually have that discussion. As I'd already alluded to, you really don't want to wait. This idea of waiting till there's something that's actually happened when you've recognized some of the red flags that we talked about earlier. I think that's really, really key in our discussion here today. And that is, if it's been on your mind, if it's something that you've been considering here right now for any of the reasons that we talked about earlier, then now's the time to open up and have that discussion. So how do we do that? There are certainly right ways and wrong ways. Screaming at dad that, he's a terrible driver. That may not be the best way to open up the dialogue. But putting yourself into the situation that I was really worried there. You almost didn't make that turn. I'm concerned about not only you, but, me as well here. Is everything okay? Opening up the dialogue to at least have a little bit of self-reflection on that, I think is a good start. And having the conversation, it really comes down to focusing on these key issues. If you can concentrate on the skills, not the age, cognitive skills, your ability to be able to navigate a route, what happens if there's a detour on the familiar route, things of that nature. And the facts, saying, I was specifically concerned when you turn left. I was concerned when you drove straight into that lane. I was concerned when you didn't make the on-ramp on time. Not just the opinions of, I don't think that you should be driving. It really doesn't help the senior driver understand what the concerns are and their ability then to be able to say, yeah, I think you're right, or no, that wasn't the case. And then we can talk a little bit more about how we can address some of the pushback that might be out there. You are not in this alone. And hopefully, if anything from today's conversations and the conference itself, there are just such a wealth of resources out there. The ability to turn to possibly more credible resources for your loved one, because it's not always the family member. And we certainly know that. Many times it might be someone from the clergy or a close friend that has a lot more influence on that senior and their decision to go ahead and reflect on their ability to drive. The doctors, especially when we talk about physical limits, if you're unable to turn your head, you can't lift your arm. Those are some limitations that in today's driving, that in many cases, those are things that you're going to need to be able to have to do to be able to operate a motor vehicle safely. Certainly the cognitive pieces as well. And we heard earlier today about resources from AARP. You have professionals such as myself. You've got social workers and clinicians who can actually help do assessments with the senior to be able to help them have a very specific, hard report on their cognitive abilities based on exercises that are directly related to their ability to drive safely. Social workers, geriatric counselors, friends, neighbors, other family members. And again, I would say that this is not all on your shoulders. There are certainly resources out there that you should consider depending upon the individual that you're actually having the conversation with, because it is an individual. It's not something that works for some, might not work for others. These are more generalities that I'm referring to right now. I like to, for those who, everyone likes to talk about money, and certainly if you hit them in the pocketbook, this can be a big awakening for them. I think AARP came out with another estimate on what it costs to run a vehicle in the Houston area. I think it's 12 to 15,000 miles a year. It's close to $10,000 once you include gas, maintenance, insurance, tolls, all of those bits and pieces that go into owning a vehicle. Needless to say that a good portion of these savings could pay for alternate transportation if necessary. And the bulk of seniors, and not that I don't want to generalize, but the idea is that many of times they're using their vehicles for relatively short trips down to the mall, down to church, down to see a friend. And if you look at the cost benefit analysis of actually owning a vehicle versus not, and taking advantage of some of these other alternative transportation modes, there's a tremendous justification not to actually do that. If there's a reluctance to say, not no, but heck no, there's no way I'm giving up my keys, a self-awareness on actually having them look at, okay, well, maybe I'll agree to not drive at night. Maybe I'll agree to stay off the freeways, certainly during rush hours. Maybe I won't drive when it's torrential rain out. This idea of, picking your parking spot, planning your route, things of that nature. But that engages the dialogue. That actually has a conversation. It maintains control for the senior. They certainly feel like they're in control because they are making that decision. And I applaud that. I really do. When they're the ones who say, I've decided as a senior driver, I've decided that I'm not going to drive at night, or I'm not going to drive on the freeway at rush hours. That's a tremendous first step to ultimately having the next steps whenever things may deteriorate in their driving abilities, for them to take it even another step further. Again, we're looking at this as a process. I've seen this work a number of times. If anyone's interested in reaching out to me, I can give you some examples or templates of a driving agreement. But ultimately, this again allows the senior to maintain that level of independence and dignity when they're the ones who are saying that, okay, based on some of the current concerns that my family has and their concern for my safety and well-being, that I agree that if things deteriorate, or if my driving, if I feel that my physical abilities are not able to drive safely, then I agree that we're going to either have a discussion, or I'm going to work with my family to find alternate transportation modes. There's no legal basis for this. It doesn't need to go, to lawyers or anything like that at all. But again, it maintains the dialogue and the openness, and more than anything else, the awareness that the driving skills may be starting to get to the point where we need to really look hard at the options. It keeps the conversation flowing. Ultimately, the key for all of us here on the call today is planning, and then I'll continue to drive this home, and that is acting on that information. We really need to implement the plan once you get it going. Yes, it's a hard way to start, and there will be bumps in the road. And when you have the discussion, especially during the onset of that dialogue. But I think it's more important than anything else, once the loved one themselves sees your genuine concern and they understand from your perspective, I'm really worried about your safety, versus the other side about you should stop driving. Completely different tones, if you will, in the actual dialogue. The key to that successful conversation is directly related to your ability to bring the issue to a peaceful resolution. And if for whatever reason it gets to be completely confrontational, and you're screaming and yelling at each other, and heaven forbid throwing things or whatever, take a break, get back to having that patience, and you may want to reach out to a professional or look to someone else for some additional support in the support group that we talked about earlier. But that planning phase is key, because there are going to come, the questions are guaranteed to be there. How am I going to get around? What are my options? And if you have some of those options in place to be able to say, well, the church outreach group, they offer a bus that we just have to put our name on a list. Or I was just looking at Impact for Lachey and Lachey Dupree, and what they offer to be able to get you to the doctor's office and back. Having those answers ahead of the conversation, I think, is such a key component to resolving this successfully. At the end of it, I'm a huge proponent of this. I've actually handed out little trophies for 50 years of success without an accident, successful driving, and celebrating retirement from driving, just like a retirement from employment. But ultimately, I think it really is embracing that it's a tough decision. It would be for any of us to actually come to that point in our driving career where we say, that's it. I think for my well-being and the well-being and concerns that my families have raised, that I'm actually going to hang up the keys. It still maintains that level of empowerment and dignity as that should be there. And for those drivers who can actually embrace some of the options that exist in the 21st century for us, more often than not, what I see is a level of relief instead of them having to get out on the road and deal with navigate the roadways that we have here in our area. I will again say it at most, it might mean a loss of convenience. Certainly some of these transportation options require that you provide a 24-hour notice, and maybe they're in a window of a trip back and forth, but it should never mean a loss of independence. And I think that that's a key point when you're having the discussions with your loved one. I'm going to hold the questions on the driving side until the end, if that's okay. And I know we're moving through our presentation here right now. So I did want to move to a similar conversation and the difficulty that we sometimes have to deal with when we're talking about moving to senior living, and not just for mom or dad, may actually be with someone, and I tend to say even closer when we're talking a spouse. And I think that, again, preparation is key and planning is key. Taking advantage of resources that exist out there, educating yourself on what exists, what the options are, understanding that first and foremost, if there's a way to actually keep the loved ones safely at the right care level in their current environment, that needs to be really explored aggressively. But if the level of care and the safety concerns do exceed the abilities and the resources of the family or those close to the loved one, then we really need to look hard at a senior living option. We're getting older. That's the reality of the circle that we're dealing with. And the likelihood that we're going to have this conversation, similar to the driving discussion here, is extremely high. We look at where our seniors are now versus where they are. In my mind, the benefit is exactly what we've heard today during our conference. And that is, I wish these resources would have been available 10 years ago or 20 years ago when I was initially having to deal with this. I went through a placement with my mom after a stroke. Dad couldn't take care of her, ended up moving her 3 times. And if I had only known that for free, I had free access to a senior placement specialist, it would have made a huge difference in really being able to pick the right community for my mom. Ultimately, those are the types of things that we need to educate ourselves. And I really applaud, Catherine and Darren for putting on these types of seminars to provide you with this information. So what are some of the questions? What are we going to deal with? And I think they're akin to a lot of things that we have whenever we're moving. Many of us have relocated in our life. I think the average family or person moves at least 7 times in their life. But I think so understanding what decisions need to be made, prepare for long-term care, what do we discuss as a family together, because this really should be seen as not the senior's issue or the spouse's issue, but this is really the family's issue. And you should be feeling that and take ownership and be that advocate for the senior. And when you're trying to understand what the options are, what kinds of help do we need? We already looked at transition resources here. We've got some of the things that we had today. We talked about some of the ways to pay for this. And I think that those are the types of things that you can reach out to, in many cases, for free consultations to be able to understand what your options are. Review the talks, the team together and the timing of the move to senior living. Timing is one area that, unless it's a medical emergency, a safety issue, or a care issue, the more time that you can actually plan up front, take the opportunity to investigate the options, see what's out there in your community, obviously that's, in my mind, you're going to have the opportunity for a better result. How do I know if it's time to move my wife or my husband or my mom or my dad? I tend to focus very much around safety and care. I think first and foremost, that needs to be at the heart of the discussion. And when I say the discussion, when your loved one is actually seeing that you're doing this out of your concern for their safety and their care, it changes the tone of the discussion. It really puts them in more control about them seeing that you're genuine in trying to make sure that they're looked after, that you don't want anything, bad to happen. And some of the seniors may just blow it off and say that, you don't know what you're talking about, I'm just fine. We'll talk a little bit about how we can start to address that. But ultimately, if they actually see that as part of the discussion versus similar to the driving conversation, I don't think you can live on your own anymore. We need to find you a place. Maybe not the best way to broach a subject. So in addition to the safety concerns, I think it's the idea of, hey, Dad, I know that you used to really like to play dominoes. Is that something you'd like to do again? Are you tired of cooking your own meals? How do you feel about taking care of the house? In addition to those types of pieces, I think, as I've outlined here on the list here, when you get to this point where you have a genuine concern about the safety and the care level of your loved one, that's the time to actually start your planning, if not earlier, just maybe due to the age of the individual, and then say, okay, I'm starting to put the steps in motion here where we can actually come to have some options, make some decisions, and review our choices. Some of the warning signs that are out there is not a fully exhaustive list, but certainly the idea that we know the impact that falls have on the general health of our seniors. When you actually have one or more falls within a 12-month period, it has a knock-on effect to their overall health or general well-being. Wandering or getting lost, the idea of EMS being called, medication management, and certainly, many seniors themselves are now getting into 6, 8, 10 medications a day, multiple different times during the day. It can be a confusing exercise for any of us. The ability to have someone manage that medication process for them, someone who's actually started to withdraw from the social activities that they used to have. You notice that the house is not clean like it used to be anymore. There's some other issues going on with their ability to be able to maintain the home on their own. And certainly exploring those different options for home care or home health care as possible options, as possible solutions to be able to address that. But at the end of the day, I think these are some of the red flags that we should really use, where sometimes we're so close to our loved ones, we don't really see them the way that maybe other people would. But if you're seeing some of these activities taking place, they should be flags where you're saying, okay, maybe there's something else we can do to provide a better living environment for our loved one. Planning is key. I can't overstate that. Research senior housing options. You heard Catherine talk about one of the sponsors here today, Oasis. You've got professionals like myself. These are free services. There's no charge to the family to at least explore what the options are out there. Maintain that focus on the safety and the level of care. The budget will always come up, and this is not going to go away. And I think the idea of really exploring some of the options that are out there for the seniors. Unknown resources exist within prepaid expenses, veteran administration benefits for aid and attendance that are not well understood, and their ability to be able to supplement some of the resources out there. We've heard about reverse mortgages, things of that nature. Everyone wants to know how long it's going to last. Unfortunately, none of us know how long we have. But I think if there's a solid plan in place along with Social Security or any pension benefits at all, it's worth at least exploring and understanding what a budget is going to be that's going to be acceptable. Engage the senior. These are, yes, you might do a lot of planning up front, getting a lot of information because there's going to be a lot of questions. But as the time goes on and you're actually looking seriously at the move, that you really need to have that level of dignity and involvement from the senior, not to where the point where they're actually having to worry about a lot of this and finding the resources. You're their advocate to be able to help them. But it does address all the what ifs. What if this happens, that happens? And I think having some answers as opposed to just throwing up your hands goes a long way. Accentuate the positive. Don't oversell this. But in preparation, many people like to actually go visit these locations. I'm here to tell you, this is not the 1950s. It's not One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. Everyone's thinking this is nursing facilities that are the ward type of environments. There are just some absolutely wonderful communities out there nowadays. Certainly some are better than others, but if you actually take the time to see how their inspections are the results of their inspections, how they address any safety or compliance concerns, there's just some wonderful communities out there. So if we look at lifestyle and we talk about have the discussion with our loved one, talking about their care level, their socialization, even if they don't want a lot of activities, maybe there's a better environment where they can sit and watch TV, watch their favorite shows all day and still have a little bit of interaction with people in their area. No housework, don't have to cook the meals. Some cases will allow you to participate if that's something that the senior is interested in. But the idea of a positive impact on the senior, and I would like to also say that stating and discussing your concerns that you as a caregiver or as a family member are worried and you're feeling stress. And it does in many examples, my experience has been that once the senior sees that, oh my gosh, my daughter is just, so worried about me here right now. Let's sit down and talk about this. Why are you so worried? If you have your list of concerns and you share that with your loved one, that sometimes can go a long way in the discussion. They can see that you're genuinely concerned about their well-being. Understand your options. There's a wealth of them out there, as we talked about. Stay at home as much as you possibly can. There are independent communities that are out there, just offer a wealth of activities and an environment of peers. And then moving up into the higher levels, next levels of care, either assisted living, residential care homes. Some of these communities actually have the continuum of care capability. In other words, you can move into independent, and then if you need more care, into assisted living, and then ultimately into memory care or skilled nursing facility. There are adult daycare communities, services out there that are available to help provide some interaction for our seniors. But being aware of those and what the options are, I think is a big part in having the discussion. When you're touring your community, when you actually go to look at some of these places, if your loved one says, yeah, okay, well, let's go look, let's go see. Either engage a senior placement specialist. Like I said, there's no charge for that, or you decide to do that on that's own. I think the idea of what to say in terms of once you actually go through it and they can actually see that these are very nice communities and they offer a lot of activities, the security's there, the care levels there. Maybe we can try it out, referencing it as a possible temporary solution. My experience has been once they actually get in and see that it's not what they had perceived, then the ability to be able to stay is tremendous. If you give them the option and say, do you think you would like to live here? My experience has been always no. They will always defer to no. I would rather live at home. So I would recommend that that's probably not the way to have the discussion about any of the communities that you see, regardless, even if they're cruise ship style environments where everything looks just so wonderful. Given that choice there, my experience has been is that the senior will always say no. Whether you think you can or you can't, and you're probably right. So you're going to know your loved one better. You're going to have a better feel for how they're going to respond to this. Have they had friends who've made the move? Have they had friends who've made the move and not had good experiences? A lot of that's going to come into play in the influence, and that should be part of your planning process. And it is a process. So get your planning done, work through it, start the conversation early. This may be a month, it may be 6 months, but the idea is that at least you're engaging and having that discussion as well. Focus on the small wins. As mentioned, a friend moved into a community, or a new community opened up in the area. Accept the fact that there's going to be some bumps in the road and there's going to be some uncertainty early in the process. You're going to need to allow some time for the discussion if it's not an emergency medical situation. And then I think the idea of don't force it, have that patience, have the empathy of working with your senior. It can be frustrating at times, and you just want to get it done and you want to get them into the right care level. But I think if you push it too hard, it's going to be a very tough transition. I did want to just, getting close to closing here, but I did want to talk about this one because this one comes up a lot. I promised my dad I would never move him to a nursing home. I made that promise. I told him verbally that I wouldn't do this. I run into this a lot. If you haven't made that promise, then none of us know what the future holds, and you're trying to be supportive of your loved one, and you want to say that, my gosh, of course I would never put you in that kind of environment, not really appreciating that that kind of environment may actually be a wonderful living situation. Sometimes those best intentions can backfire. It can be an unrealistic promise, and it can complicate the conversation. In my mind, what they're really asking is that, promise me you'll protect my dignity, you'll protect my privacy, promise to make sure I don't live in pain. Those are the types of things that you as a loved one for a senior or a spouse can actually commit to. Those are the types of things that we are most definitely focused on, and by our presence here today, those are the ones there. If you get to the situation, remember what we talked about earlier. It's about safety and care. It's time to step up and recognize that this is not a failure on your part. You didn't have any control over their need for care, or the fact that they got a disease or something like that. That's not your fault. It's not a failure on your part if you have to renege from that commitment that you'd made. You're not a martyr. You're ultimately trying to do the right thing for your loved one to make sure that they get the best care. You can't change the care that they need, but what you can do is help them find the right community. And it doesn't end with a placement. You're not going anywhere. You're not, locking them up. You're going to be there. And in many cases, my experience has been, it allows you as the loved one to focus more on being a family member as opposed to a caregiver. And I know that might sound a little semantical, but it really does. It's just wonderful when you have someone else to be able to manage the day-to-day activities of daily living, all of the different pieces that support a very safe and caring environment, and you're there to enjoy that with them as a family member. Ways to start: ask your senior, do they have a plan if they ever need it? Long-term care. Do you need some help in getting some housekeeping done? Would you mind, how do you feel about keeping up the house? Would you like more social interaction? These are some open-ended questions, and they're definitely the best. They give the senior the opportunity to respond and verbalize, I think, what their expectations and intentions might be, and really reflect on the fact that, yeah, this is part of the process here. So I think in difficult conversations across the board, and I don't want to just fall into generalities, but these are some things that I've seen work extremely well. They're not easy, but putting them off is, even in my mind, an even worse situation. The environment usually never really improves, and ultimately having the open dialogue early, while the senior or the loved one is in a better position to be able to comprehend what's going on, is usually the best opportunity. Plan, do your homework, reach out, Listen to what the senior is telling you. Have that empathy, not the sympathy. Don't feel bad for them. I think you're really just looking to be able to make this work. Reach out to the support groups, the resources that we saw here today on the conference. Maintain that respect, have the patience, build that team. You are not in this alone, and heaven forbid that you go this road alone. I would encourage you to really reflect on that and say, no, let me take advantage from people who've been there and the resources that are out there. Involve the senior and understand that this is going to be difficult. And what you're trying to do is minimize the disruption and allow this to be as smooth as you can. There's going to be some bumps in the road, guaranteed. But more than anything else, I encourage you to act. When you recognize these challenges, have those discussions. And with that, I'd like to go ahead and open it up to any questions. Anything there, Darren?
Did you go back to the screen with your contact information?
Oh, I'm sorry.
Kind of quickly.
No, I did it kind of quickly. I absolutely did.
There was a couple people who were saying they'd love a list of like transportation resources in the Houston area. There's a couple people who said that.
Okay. Can you see it there?
And then someone asks, oh, they're just asking how to ask a question. You can either type the question to us, you can try to unmute yourselves, or yeah, just raise your hand and we'll try to unmute you too.
Okay, I'm Nancy. I'm unmuted. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Good. Okay. My husband does not drive for convenience or transportation. He drives for pleasure. He owns, I believe, 5 cars, I think 4 of which are Corvettes, from a 1970 to a 2021, I believe. People have suggested, and it's time for him to stop driving, certainly slow down, if not stop. I don't need to get into all the reasons, but healthcare providers are on board, et cetera. I can't take away his keys. He would just go to the next car, the next car, the next car. So this is an issue that seems unique to me. Oh, and he is still talking about trying to get his professional race car driving certification, which was delayed because of the pandemic. He went to a driving school, like for, race car drivers 2 years ago, and has been itching to get back to it. So he's still focusing on driving and racing when others like me think he shouldn't be driving at all. So, it's been a challenge for me to try to figure out how to approach it. And if you have any suggestions, it would be much appreciated. They would be much appreciated.
No, and thank you so much for sharing that, Nancy, with us here. So I think first and foremost, you mentioned that you did have some concerns. So I'd be very specific about what those concerns are, with regards to either whatever those specific issues are, driving over the center line, driving too fast, getting lost, or just his ability to get in and out of the car. But I would be very specific and hone in, make a list yourself on what you find to be the exact issues that you've got. The next step to this, I think, is being able to understand because we're trying to do everything we can to allow him to stay on the road safely. But how would he feel if he had an accident and all of a sudden lost all of his cars? The reality is that if he was at an at-fault situation, there may be repercussions here whereby all of that goes away. Are there friends that can drive for him, other family members that might be able to drive him around so he doesn't lose the actual sensation of his wonderful collection of cars? And then, of course, if he's still uncertain as to what your concerns are, I would say reach out and get a self-assessment done on his ability. It doesn't have to be clinical, and he's going to fight it here, but if he says that he's doing it for your benefit, you say, my goodness, I wish you just at least have a quick driving test. These are usually 2 to 3 hours. They're done in the comfort of your home. or with the COVID, if there's a concern there, they can be done virtually. But the exercises that are done are not, they're not subjective, and there's no gray area. Either they're able to complete the exercise and they're not. My experience has been once they actually go through a driving assessment and they see the results, then they really look in the mirror and say, oh my gosh, I didn't realize that that was the case here right now. And then you can start talking about it. I'd hate for him to have to give up his collection, and the idea of trying to find someone else to help drive for him or with him, a friend or some other family member, may be something that at least allows it. But I'm saying that knowing that if it was me, as we always try and do, I'd want the thrill and the excitement of being behind the wheel, and if it's shifting the gears or whatever he finds to be part of it as well. But I'd start with your list of specifics about what your concerns are, and ultimately recognize that there's going to come a time that he really needs to look at restricting and then ultimately hanging up the keys. Was that helpful at all? Did that make any sense?
It all makes sense. I've tried most of it, but where would I find the self-assessment that he can do at home?
Yep, there's one. And if you'd like to send me your contact information, I'll send you a book you can do on your own. No charge
Great.
at all. I don't know, is there a way, Catherine, for me to get that information? Or you've got my, let me say it this way.
Yes,
You've got my
have her
contact
email
information,
you.
right? Yeah, exactly. Just
Yeah.
email me and I'd be happy to send one out to you here. And it's something you can walk through. If you have any questions on it all, just reach out to me. But it's something you can do on your own as well. To be able to walk through this just with him, to be able to see what the issues actually might be.
Okay, I just put my contact information in the chat directly to you.
Okay.
So I hope you'll get that. Thank you so much. This has been a very big challenge. And when I've asked for help, people always say, oh gosh, that is a challenge. And I've never really been able to get anyone to help me solve it.
It's not unique to you, believe me, and it's almost and this is why I started with the driving conversation first in the presentation. It's one of the more difficult, and we tend to just kind of push it back because we're not sure what the options are and what ways that we might be able to address it.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
So, Jack, a couple of things in the chat. Hold on, I'm trying to get to it again. Okay, somebody wanted to know, how do you research senior care communities that you recommend?
Great question. So there's a number of sites that we have access to. Some of the senior placement professionals that are out there, and there's a wealth of them. It's not just me. And we know Oasis is another sponsor of the conference here today. And it starts very much with, we have access to all of the state reports. So we know any inspection issues that are out there, compliance, safety, any violations that they might have. In many cases, I look at those and I do my own, albeit subjective assessment of a community. I visit every single one. I like to actually meet with the owners. I like to meet the caregivers. What kind of turnover do they have? When I walk in, does it smell? Does it, or the residents look like they're comfortable and taken care of? What do the grounds look like? But when we look at some of the inspection reports from the Texas state, to me, the inspectors more often than not will find something. I don't know, I can't say to really justify the role, but certainly there's something that they'll find, a fire extinguisher maybe out of inspection or something like that. To me, it's more, how long does it take the community to rectify that situation? If it takes several months, that's a reflection on the community in my assessment. I share that assessment with the family completely. And then we talk about very much about things like budget, activities. Do they allow pets? Certainly in this era of COVID, what, if any, additional restrictions may or may not be out there in visitation? Can we have meals together? All of those pieces go in to being able to provide the family with a community that they consider, because ultimately it's the family's choice. They should never have a placement specialist make a referral to you saying you should choose this place. That should never happen. You should always have retain that option on your own. And then hopefully out of all of that information, after an initial assessment with the family, what location are you looking for? What care levels required? Do you need a nurse on staff? Do you need portable dialysis? How am I going to get my hair done? Do they offer a chance to do my nails? All of that information. That's where I think taking advantage of a free service takes all that legwork off of you to be able to then have some decent options. I'm hopeful that was helpful because there's a lot of information that goes into ultimately paring down a list of options for a community that someone might be interested in.
Okay, Jack, Laura made a comment. It's not really a question, but maybe you can offer her some suggestions. She said, sadly, my father-in-law was issued a renewed driver's license because he lives in a small town and upset the lady that works there, yelled at her, and she just ended up issuing it. He can't see to drive, and he's showing signs of dementia.
Right. So when we talked about getting the other people in your circle involved, she may want to think about a conversation with, if she's got specifics, again, getting to the specific concerns, the issues that are at the heart of the driving concern, whether it be visibility, dementia, then you need to really think about a conversation with the doctor, with the physician. Ultimately, and I rarely recommend this, but if there is if someone with the stage 4 dementia should never have their license. I hate to sound cold about that, but that's the reality. They should not be on the road. And if for whatever reason they are, some drastic effects might need to take place. You can always take the battery cable off or park the car down the road and say that you sold it and things of this nature. But I think engaging those in the circle that we talked about earlier, the physician, having them involved in the discussion, I think is key. They're going to be reluctant to have any liability for it, but they could certainly have that discussion with the senior. Anyone else that you feel might be important, you may want to have a discussion, especially if it is in a small town, with the local sheriff's department, and make sure that they're aware of this and the concerns that you have on the safety to the loved one and the public. There's not a lot they're going to be able to do about it, but they're certainly going to be aware of it. Look at this idea of being able to get an assessment completed, because a clinical assessment actually would go a much farther way with that. If you do get a driving assessment done, if you can have that loved one agree for that report to be shared, then that's something that could go a long way in curtailing or possibly revoking the actual driver's license. These are drastic steps, but ultimately it's about keeping that loved one safe and the public safe around them. So I think they're reaching out to some of the other professionals is going to be a key piece of this.
Great suggestions. And, I will say that is not an unusual thing. My dad went to a small town to get his driver's license too. It was well known where he lived that if you just drove a few miles over to such and such town, they'd pass you no problem.
Right.
And so this does happen. So your suggestions are spot on though. Great. Let's see. Jada wants to know how you can find the inspection report information.
The Texas Health and Human Services provides a free site to the public. It's I think it's just hhs.org, and you can actually get in there and look at it. There's they have a date when the last inspection was there, things of that nature. I don't have the site right here right now, but if you'd like to go ahead and just email me, I can send that information out. Again, I tend to use that subjectively. I use the information based on my firsthand inspections that I do personally, with the community. But it is a great, there's some great information, especially if you can see repeated violations in that as well. And I'm so glad to hear the question, because that means you're doing your homework. That's awareness is the first key to success in this.
Absolutely. Dospina says, my father's 87 and has Parkinson's. He's never had an accident, never been given a ticket. He says he drives perfectly fine. We are at an impasse.
Yeah, I find that our senior drivers are great historians, and they're just wonderful at talking about the 50 or 60 years that they've had without any traffic moving violations at all. And of course, it doesn't guarantee that they're not going to have an accident tomorrow. But I think celebrating that experience, and similar to the retirement from employment, I tend to really play up the idea that is just so wonderful, and it really is, to have that longevity of being safe on the road. I also say that at the end of the day, it's not you, Dad, that I'm worried about. It's the teenager who's texting on his phone, eating a burger, not paying attention to the road, and all of a sudden you're in an accident, and the statistics are clear that the senior, even in relatively minor accidents, end up with some very, very severe injuries. Let's look at this a little harder. Let's look at some of the options. Can we talk about it? And then again, specifics of what those issues are, either, wandering or getting lost, or the fact that they're driving so far under the speed limit, or, and then also the maintenance on the vehicle. If money is of a, is at the forefront of this as well, sharing with them, it's amazing when we sit down and actually lay out line by line what it costs to run a vehicle. It's not cheap, to be able to keep the vehicle on the road.
Hey, I'm not seeing any more questions. If anybody has any more questions, please type them in the chat or unmute yourself and just talk. Either way. Jack, this has been amazing. This has been really good. You have such good insight and information.
Well,
Did we touch on the question, how do you find the inspection report information?
Yep, we just went through.
Okay, just double checking. I saw that one.
Okay, let's see. It looks like somebody else. A lot of thank yous. Oh, somebody says, I almost sold his car only to find out he bought a new one. Oh, bless your heart.
Yeah.
Well, there's still those battery cables.
I've seen some unique, solutions to it as well.
That was me. So I have two funny stories on almost selling his car. And so I'm the one that posted my dad's 87 and he has Parkinson's. His gait is crap and he has a pretty moderate to severe tremor. Right. But, by the grace of God, he's not gotten in an accident, not gotten any tickets. So that's that. But just to bring a little bit of levity to this, I had hidden his keys. Mm-hmm. And he said, honey, do you know where my keys are? I just don't know where I put them. I said, no, Dad, I don't know. He goes, I'm sure I dropped them somewhere. I'm just so glad I have an extra set.
Of course. Yeah. Of course.
And there you go.
And there you go. And then you got to get your hand on those as well. I can't even imagine someone coming to me and saying, okay, that's it, Jack, your driving career is over. I really want to empathize with them and understand, what my options are. When that time comes for me, am I going to be the one, thank goodness, I don't have to drive anymore. Look, I can just call a Uber or call the church, they'll get me around, or call, I think with Lachey's iPack, I call those people and they can get me to where I need to go. Or am I going to be the one digging my heels in and go, no, that's fine until something happens. And then so it's when something happens, that's when, we start shaking our heads and going, oh my gosh, I should have done this, I should have done that. And we should not have that kind of regret or remorse about it as well. And that's why I feel that as difficult as it is, really getting out there, engaging those people around you, the doctors, the clergy, the friends. The friends have so much influence on what our seniors can do, because they can talk very candidly, very direct, much more so than family members. And, and those hard conversations can be really well supported if there is someone close to the family that you feel you can trust and help support the discussion.
Absolutely. Any other questions? Okay, I think that is it, Jack. Thank you so much.